Welcome to the Wisdom Circle. To subscribe or follow us on your favorite podcast platforms, please visit us at www.thewisdomcircle.com.
Welcome to the Wisdom Circle. We are excited to have our guest, Ed Desser, founder of Desser Media. And when you read, eddesser.tv, I think, right? If you Google Ed Desser TV, you will get...
No, just Desser.tv.
Desser.tv. If you Google Ed, you will see one of the most complete careers I have ever looked at. Ed, we want to talk about your journey, so I'm not going to do too much of it. But let's just say that as you go through it, you have been around every table on both sides. You have created tables that didn't exist. The idea of being, the fact checker and the expert witness was something no one ever heard of until I hadn't heard about this guy I knew in sports doing it. And so it's really exciting to have you. Had a great career at the NBA working for the big man, David Stern, and then lots of other great stops, negotiations, etc. Tony Ponturo, my partner in crime here at the Wisdom Circle. We both enjoy having great experts and great folks on. And, the conversations often talk about sports, but we really like the wisdom to be the lead word in terms of helping a whole lot of folks who are early stage career, mid stage career, and some late stage career. Just hear about someone with your time and expertise. Tony, you want to say hi, throw in a word or a question, get us going?
No, it's Ed, first of all, great to see you, and we appreciate the time. We know how busy you are, and as Ray and I always say, we think we probably learn as much as those that listen and watch our podcasts. It's a good way to stay relevant in what we do and what we did, and so let's just jump in and get into the meat of the podcast.
Yeah, okay, great. All right, so Ed, when we spoke, we talked about these kind of evergreen topics that really, the last time we had Joe Yuva on 2 weeks ago, and he talked about the Ted Turner showing up at Gray Advertising when he was a assistant media planner who had been there for either 4 weeks or 4 months. I'll say 4 weeks because it sounds better. And no one wanted to meet with this guy with a big drawl, a loud voice, and a styrofoam spit cup. And Joe wound up being the guy who saw Ted, and Ted didn't forget that. And Joe wound up, running everything sales related at Turner. So again, those are the little stories that people are often, I had a whole bunch of comments from folks who said, I had no idea. So we'd love to hear someone talk about, we shared the fact that you are actually a licensed disc jockey broadcaster, and, talk about where you started or wherever you want to start and wherever you want to finish. And, as I said, I think, the Cliff Notes is the best way to do that. And I don't want to put too much effort and information out there that we confuse people. So,
well, we could start as early as my childhood when I used to record quarter-inch audio tapes. But I think it's probably more useful, since very few of the people listening to this would even know what that is, that we fast forward, so to speak.
Good point.
So I would start by saying I got involved in the media business by having a fascination for radio. And I was encouraged at the age of 14 to get an FCC license, which allowed me to operate a commercial radio station. Now, I find it ironic that I was doing that at an age that I wasn't allowed to operate a motor vehicle, but be that as it may, that was essentially where my career started. I worked for a number of radio stations in Southern California, where I grew up. That led me to a station that, unbeknownst to anyone and really having nothing to do with me, the station got the radio broadcast rights to carry the Lakers in 1977. And the radio station was a country music station. And if you can imagine the culture clash between the country music station and the NBA circa 1977, that'll give you an idea of how popular that move was. And so that actually opened a door because I didn't consider it to be the end of the world as we knew it. I thought it actually could create some opportunities. And I was, I was probably a little bit too assertive in sharing those views than would have been politic at that time. But as a result of that, I raised my hand and they basically said, "Okay, Desser, you're so supportive of this idea, you do it." And that was the beginning of my sports career. I produced Lakers radio network with the famous Chick Hearn, and interestingly and timely, the first time that Pat Riley served as color commentator. Um, and that led to working for the Lakers and Kings and the Forum while I was still in college. That got me to basically expand beyond radio to also understand television. And that led me to get to know people at the various league offices. And ultimately, one day, a guy from New York, a lawyer from New York, shows up at my office door unannounced, which typically isn't such a good thing. There were no FBI jackets or raids going on, but nevertheless, the lawyer, who was somebody that I'd known for a while and had provided some help to on various matters, essentially asked me if I would be interested in joining the league office. Now you have to again put yourself in the world of 1982, where the NBA was at the time and where the Lakers were at the time. My reaction was not really, but the lawyer was very persistent. And I was at a point in my life where I didn't have any particular restrictions on what I could do. I was 24 years old and was being asked to run, the media business for a professional sports league. Ultimately, friends of mine persuaded me that it was probably not a bad idea. Might learn something. Who knows where it might lead? And so I ended up taking the job. As an aside, that lawyer's name was David Stern. So
wow, that's great. Hey,
Ed, can I interject real quick? Because I think it's
I have a
helpful.
question too.
A lot of young people that I interface with now have sort of the attitude of, well, I've never done that, so how could I be in charge of that? And I always try to remind them from my experience when I went to Anheuser-Busch when I was 30 to be director of media. The only thing I had ever done in media was buy national TV time. So if I had said, well, how can I...
And probably drink beer.
And drink beer. I knew how to drink beer. So I'd be curious because you were this radio person, obviously a lot of experience, but now you're going to the league to oversee the whole media department. What gave you, how did you look at that? It's like, you obviously didn't say, well, I never did all that, so I'm not qualified. You said, let's go do it.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that I really even knew what all was involved. It didn't occur to me for a moment that I couldn't do it. It was really more a question of, do I want to do it? Do I want to move to New York? I didn't own an overcoat at the time. So, the whole concept was sort of foreign to me, but I had an affection for David Stern. And he was, he was basically the Pied Piper, and I was following. So, and I ended up learning a tremendous amount. And I think in terms of turning points, that was certainly a huge turning point. But um, the opportunity came about as a result of the fact that I just had this thirst for knowledge and kind of an unquenchable interest in media. I wasn't even it wasn't even so much sports. It happened to be sports,
Hmm.
but it was all forms of media, and I found it tremendously
Right.
interesting. And I would read anything I could get my hands on, and I would volunteer for anything that I could possibly do. And I essentially taught myself the media business. So it isn't that you necessarily can go to school and get a
Yeah.
degree in exactly the thing that you want to do. It's really that, if you can network, um, all of this stuff was as a result of networking. It was never about, sending resumes out or anything like that.
But you know what
Um,
you said? You said something interesting. You said earlier, I raised my hand when the station said, who's going to do this NBA thing, and you said a little too aggressive. You raised your hand, and so that was that because of a thirst for knowledge? Was that just a confidence? Was that a curiosity? Was that a
it,
nobody
it
else wanted?
was, it was probably youthful enthusiasm. At the time, I would actually liken it more to one of those, to the people lined up in the firing squad, and and them asking for volunteers, um, and everyone else in the line steps backwards, and I wasn't astute enough to do so. So
So you
there
got
I
picked.
was standing in front, and the next thing you
Right.
know, I'm a sports producer.
But I mean, that's so big. I think the thing that we hear and understand a lot is I wouldn't call it a reluctance of the younger generations. And again, how we try to help those who do hear us on this podcast. Nothing's coming to you, really. You got to reach out. You've got to grab it. You've got to raise your hand. You've got to do all those things. I am curious to know how that lawyer found you. I mean, how did you and David Stern? I mean, it was a 23 years at the NBA and long, forever,
Yes.
ultimately. But how? Because we all need that one person in our career who can really, either mentor us, bring us along, get us to new opportunities.
It was not by design. It was, if I remember correctly, I think I first ran into David when the NBA made its first national cable deal, which was 1979 in the USA Network. And so I'm working at the Lakers, and we get at that time the communications from the league. No one will know what a telex is, but that's what leagues used to use to communicate to team offices. So a telex came through basically saying, okay, we need to tip off the game, opening night at 7:30 because it's the second game of a doubleheader. And so I'm like apoplectic because I've got, two commercial breaks to get in between 7:30 and the tip. And it really shocked me that the league didn't understand that, and and didn't respect what I needed. And so I was a kind of vociferous complainer as a result, and that brought me to people's attention. It's like, okay, the guy in LA is a pain in the ass. Um, but I happen to be right on that one, and they
Right.
didn't really understand the issue. But that was, I think, the beginning of my um, notoriety at the league office, and there were a number of other things that happened afterwards. And for example, it was, I think, 1981, or maybe it was late 80. Um, David called and said, we have this idea. We want to create a videotape library, and we want this new network called ESPN to do a weekly show about us. And I got the board to agree to buy videotape equipment, but we actually have no idea how we could go about actually getting the games recorded and, and shipped to Bristol, Connecticut. And so I wrote a plan up at his request. So, here's this is where you need to locate the equipment. These are the feeds you need for the equipment. Here's who the operator for the equipment would be. Here are the logs you should have the operator utilize. And so it was it was fairly easy for me. I don't remember how long it took, but it wasn't very long. But that was one of the many things that I was called upon to help the league with. And, I didn't realize it at the time, but it was, it was obviously, the best possible setup for being offered a job. Um, and of course, it wasn't a job I had any interest in. I didn't
That always
really want
happens.
to move.
That
And
always
so,
happens.
but I didn't. Maybe I was naive,
People
or I was
chase.
anxious to be helpful.
Right.
Um, and that's
Great.
what it amounted to.
Yeah. No, that's something that I think is a huge life lesson early in a career. Is raise your hand. Don't be afraid.
Volunteer.
And do some
Go.
research and push back
Yep.
if you're right or give it some thought. So yeah, people want to hear the truth ultimately, even the bosses who don't necessarily take it well. But when I get into executive positions, the one thing someone said to me is just surround yourself with people who tell you the truth. And that's what I always tried to do. So
And who are smarter than you.
absolutely, yes, indeed. So
Well,
that's where
and
you
the nuance here, Ed, is, as people are listening, and you sort of hinted to it, the NBA in those days were running their championship games in late night and maybe even delayed, as I recall.
Yes.
The David Stern wasn't the David Stern we know today. You were an LA kid, UCLA, USC, going to New York. And so everyone thinks, oh, yeah, the NBA and David Stern, that's a no brainer. But it really wasn't a no brainer. And so
Not at
the,
all.
the risk taking, which we talk a lot about, is key. It's like you can, as you say, you can say it now. I hate to say it, 40 years later, we don't know the story we're writing until it's written, and then we can look back and see how it went. But but it really was risk taking, because who knew? It wasn't what we know. Both David Stern, who sadly passed away, and the NBA, what it's become. So it is that risk. I always try to tell young people. I don't know if you thought of it this way. I sort of sense you did, because you're young and you're confident, which is, if this doesn't work out, I'll find something else. But this is intriguing enough to take the opportunity. And if it's not what I thought, then I'll go to the next thing.
life goes on.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, so refute me if I'm wrong.
Well, I would say for me at the time, the question was less about the opportunity, because it. I mean, I was sort of cautious about that. It was more about, what am I giving up? Because the Lakers and the Kings in the early 80s under Jerry Buss, it was state of the art. It was inventing what sports entertainment would become. And it was a very, very exciting place to be at the time, winning championships. So it was more about, giving that up, and less about the opportunity at the league. And then you sort of overlay, do I really want to be living in New York? Which, if you also go back in time, this was shortly after New York had gone broke, and, it was graffiti everywhere. And you guys probably spent a lot more time in New York at that time than I did. But
Yes.
you know what I mean?
Oh yeah. That's a really good point. So at 20, because this is another thing we talk to, especially among actually early career and mid career, is relocation. Because some people just in early career stage will say, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. And what was your experience? Had you been to New York at 24? Were you jumping on a plane for the first time? And obviously the headlines were out, New York's broke, blah, blah, blah. But what was your thinking about, forget the job and the NBA and David Stern, What am I giving up? I'm giving up California lifestyle
Yeah,
to
California
go to New York.
lifestyle. I had this vision that, the East Coast in the winter was basically a perpetual blizzard.
You're right this year.
And I know, but that's what, if you grow up in LA, you think of it as the West, as the East Coast. So there were all of these negatives in the back of my mind, but David was so persuasive, and in fact, I'll give you one other sort of quick story, which was, I never actually said yes to the job offer. Um, uh, David basically used this assumptive close on me, and we're at the league meetings in Coronado a few months after he had made the proposal, and after he had had me meet the then commissioner Larry O'Brien. Um, and so we're at this meeting of team broadcast personnel, and they're all there to complain about all the things that are wrong with the league. And David takes that occasion to say, well, good news, guys. Ed Desser is joining the league, and he'll take care of all those issues. So,
And you
and
had to say
I
no.
hadn't told Jerry Buss at that point. I
Oh,
hadn't,
goodness.
it was a great lesson in the way that David would operate.
Yeah, you didn't say no. So he assumed that was a yes.
No, there was never an opportunity to say no. He said yes for me.
There
Hey,
you
Ed,
go.
speaking of those two guys, and then we'll move on from those days. But
Yep.
between Jerry Buss and David Stern, two very unique people, what would you say you took away from each one that helped develop your, I'll call it leadership skills or management skills, whatever you want to frame it?
Well, Jerry was a showman, and he was very clear about wanting to innovate. And so, he was the first person to sell naming rights to the building, the Great Western Forum. He brought in the Laker girls. No one had dancing girls at the time. There were college teams had cheerleaders, but he won up that. So he was really a showman. He developed the connection between Hollywood and the Lakers, and so I think that's what I took from him, and along with things like premium seating. I mean, back then they were charging $50 or $100 for a courtside seat, and he decided to make it $1,000, and now it's $5,000. And having specialized seating that was for all events, that wasn't done at the time either. So he was an innovator, and he changed the business, and all those things that from back then that he was responsible for are now commonplace throughout the NBA and sports in general. David, I think, had many of the same characteristics. I wouldn't necessarily call him a showman, but he had a wickedly smart intellect, and had the ability to force things to happen. And what happened in terms of my accepting the job is one example, but he was responsible for getting a salary cap. He was responsible for getting a drug agreement. He helped me launch the international television business. Enabled me to start NBA TV, NBA League Pass, NBA.com. All of these things wouldn't have happened the same way had he not had me to kind of lead the charge, and me not have him, kind of guarding the flank, because each one of these things, though seemingly no big deal today faced obstacles. For example, uh, League Pass was seen by all of the local broadcasters and the national broadcasters as worrisome. They were concerned about having access to plenty of other games that might lead somebody to not watch the game that they had bought the rights to.
Right.
So these there were real issues. There were technical issues. I mean, he relied on me more for the technical, and I relied on him for more the political.
Right.
But
Would you say that it was vision on both of their parts or personality? Because I think that's another thing that our audience is interested in. It's not necessarily a matrix or a spreadsheet or although these days with
there
AI,
weren't spreadsheets.
maybe it is. Yeah, there were 13 column pads, right, with 40 lines of data you could put in a pencil. But
Yeah.
so what was if there was a common thread? Because again, leadership is also part of the things that some of our audience are very interested in as their career progresses. Was there a tie that binds the two as it relates to their leadership and their success with the Lakers and what they were able to do with the NBA?
Well, I would say that David was a visionary leader. He knew what needed to be done, and he wasn't afraid to do it. And he would basically, steamroll anyone or anything that was in his way. He was, he had this intellect and understanding of the business. He was a voracious reader. He was in touch with and had access to, every decision maker. And so he just had a kind of superior network that he could call on when needed. He also recognized that the NBA had, huge untapped international potential. And
How would you have understood that? Like, how would you?
He understood it originally because there were some folks who showed up at his office door in the early 80s who wanted to buy the rights to telecast games in Italy. And prior to 1982, CBS had the international rights for all the NBA games that CBS carried and had their international division distribute them. Well, come 1982, and you may remember this, CBS cut way back on their regular season NBA coverage because they had bought the NCAA tournament and were doubling down on college and also had PGA Tour. And so they went from televising, 15 or 20 NBA regular season games to televising 5. And that in turn meant that CBS International didn't have as many games in inventory. Right. And that caused some of their clients to seek us out and say, hey, we'd like to buy some more games, and CBS doesn't have any. So that's actually how the international business started. It was the Italians, and there was a company in Japan that had a 2-channel satellite system. And they wanted sports programming as well. And so that's really what gave us the start. 3 years later, the CBS agreement that was for all of about $250,000 a year was expiring. I mean, these numbers seem bizarre in today's environment. But CBS was paying $250,000 for the international rights to the NBA, including the finals and the All-Star game and so forth. And so that deal is coming to an end. And I think CBS grudgingly offered $300 or $350, and David and I kind of looked at each other and was like, well, we can probably make at least that much just selling the games to Japan and Italy. and then anything else we can get will be gravy. And so, I suddenly find myself in the international TV sales business, having never done an international TV deal.
That's very cool.
But 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 that's the way things happen. There wasn't
Yeah.
anyone else. I think
And they
earlier in our conversation, you said, you took over the NBA's media team. Well, the NBA's media team was me.
Right.
There was no
So
team.
that's great. Well,
There were
and some
30
of those,
people in the league office at the time.
yeah, I think those opportunities still exist. They're just different and harder to find. I want to jump up to 2026 and what you're doing now, the sports landscape as you see it. Well, maybe 25, because you might not be able to talk about what you're doing in 2026. But
I may not know what I'm doing in 2026 yet. There are a bunch of things on the tentative list, so we'll see.
I'm sure. But so, where do you see? I mean, the streaming services coming in with big fat checkbooks, with regional sports networks that were the most profitable part of the broadcasters in a very different world. What would be your level set of here's where we are today, ladies and gentlemen?
Well, I would say we have never been in the kind of place that we are in the sports media business. So and if you think about eras, and that's the way I like to think about it, in the pre-1980 period, there were 3 broadcast networks, there were a handful of local TV stations, and that was it. And so there was very, very, very little shelf space for sports. Sports was Saturday and Sunday afternoons on networks, and primetime weeknights on local stations, and that was it. And so when cable came along in, call it, the early 80s, and networks like TNT, TBS, ESPN launched. In fact, at the time, people said, well, how are they ever going to find enough content for a 24-hour network? But of course, that was long before ESPN2, ESPN3, ESPNU, etc. So that was sort of the second wave, and cable penetration went from 20% to 90% over the course of the next 30 years, and in the process, cable kind of slowly assumed a certain amount of content that had previously only been on broadcast, and so that was the time when the amount of available content was exploding, the shelf space, that created opportunities for things like League Pass and for NBA TV. And that got us really through around, call it, 2012. And then 2012 was the very beginning of the streaming era. And early on, it was just entertainment. But as everyone knows, the last 5 years or so, it has become entertainment and sports. And so we're now in a period of time where cable penetration is declining, broadcast usage is declining, streaming hours are now surpassing the broadcast and cable consumption hours. If you look at the Nielsen gauge, platforms like YouTube and Netflix and Amazon Prime have the majority of, if not, well, maybe not the majority, but they certainly have the plurality of viewership today. So we're at this pivotal juncture where the money machine, which was cable, is in decline, and then this new money machine of streaming has already kind of sucked the viewership out, and did so in part because of more selection, more greater ease of use, but also lower pricing. So it's hard to compete with Netflix at $10, $15, $20 a month with almost unlimited capacity. If you're a cable operator with a $150 price tag a month, and my subscription's $375 because I have all the bells and whistles.
Right.
So
Not a young
that's
man's game.
expensive.
That's not a young man's game. Exactly.
No, but
Yeah.
so we're at this inflection point where the money still predominantly comes from cable, but the viewership isn't predominantly on cable. What that has highlighted is the disproportionate importance of sports, which wasn't really the case. I referred earlier to the days when it was just weekend afternoons, and Tony will remember, you'll remember too, right?
Yeah.
The sports department was the candy store, the toy store. It was not considered serious entertainment or serious programming.
Right.
It was what we can fill with the weekends, and
Right.
that has fundamentally changed now that there is so much entertainment content. Entertainment content is no longer is almost generic, whereas sports is the only thing left that really is exclusive, proprietary, topical, and so that's where we are today. And over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, the deals that are in place for major sports properties on linear networks are going to expire. And as we just saw with the NBA went from having two partners to having three, and two of those three partners are, in fact, all of those partners are heavily engaged in doing streaming.
Right.
In the case of Amazon, they're only doing streaming. So we're shifting to a new world, and that's what everyone is having to adjust to.
Yeah.
And it opens up all kinds of interesting possibilities. In the old days, as we all remember, you promoted a sports event with a 10, 15, 20-second tune-in promo, and that and a drop-in here and there. And if you really go back, even newspaper ads.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah.
But you didn't have something like a Amazon homepage that you could tease that there's a live game on right this minute. You didn't have Amazon, having trucks all over the streets with reminding people there's an NBA or NFL game. You didn't have boxes showing up at people's doors with advertising for those games. The share of things that have increased and were not possible in the old days really resets the world, and we're living through a time when everyone is trying to figure it out, and that's before we even get to issues of AI.
Do you think that? Yeah, for sure. Is there a lot of data advantage that is being shared where Amazon or Netflix, even Peacock, can say, we're not just going to give you a television rating, we're going to give you more precise data on who's watching and what they're doing and et cetera, back to the NFL or the NBA or all that? Is that going to lead more towards data providers have an advantage versus beautiful broadcasters?
I think it's already happening. It is one of the Amazon knows who's watching, what kind of appliance they're watching on. They have their credit card information. They have their zip code. They know what products they buy from Amazon. They know what other networks they buy from Amazon channels. There's so much information, and if they want to mine that and offer it as an additional reason for somebody to make a buy, they have that opportunity. I mean, and unlike our experiences having to rely completely on Nielsen, they can choose to have Nielsen or not, or they can provide a census I mean, they know to the person, maybe not to the person, but they certainly know to the household level, how many are watching and what parts of the game or what parts of the movie or what, they can mix and match their data. So data is a huge new opportunity. And when you think about it, we all lived through a time when we thought a monthly report from Nielsen was a lot of useful data, but it was nothing, and it was
And
it
it
was
wasn't
just
useful.
a small sample.
Yeah, exactly. Tony, maybe I hijacked it, maybe I didn't. But we have hit the 40-minute mark magically. Seems like it went pretty quick to me. What are your thoughts? Because I was thinking of, Augie, that you've talked about seeing the future, and they kind of connected in with the third, of course. Ed's talking about David and Jerry Buss. I mean, anything you wanted to mine there with Ed's comments?
No, I think what I just heard and what's I believe in a lot is the consumer, which is us and our fellow humans, take us where the industry is going to go. So sort of oversimplifying. Um, when satellite television started, the consumer started to say, "Well, there's some options here that I don't have on ABC, CBS, and NBC," and they followed it. And I know network salespeople that were cynical that wasn't competition, and they were losing share of audience, but somehow that was something else, right? I can relate to that in the beer business because as the Distilled Spirits said, well, we can actually market our products responsibly. Then all of a sudden there was competition, and beer salespeople had to say when they went into a bar, oh, wait a minute, Jägermeister bombs and bourbon shots and tequilas and margaritas were a choice, just like a beer choice. It wasn't, it wasn't a separate entity. It was an alcohol choice. So I think all of us as industry people are, yes, technology ultimately with AI now is going to take things to give us choice. And then the consumer will decide what that is, and broadcasters, advertisers will follow ultimately the consumer. And Ray's heard this sort of ad nauseum from me is that we, the consumer, underwrite sports.
And I always thought that was brilliant because it's true.
And from ticket sales to licensing to cable subscriptions to streaming costs, the whole bit. We are the underwriters of sports. Everyone gives credit to the big broadcasters and others and the leagues, but at the end of the day, they're just passing it on to us. So I'm a big fan, and I'll turn it back to the summary is human behavior is data, is research. So we always try to encourage people like, go to a stadium and watch what's going on. See, I remember saying once to George Bodenheimer at ESPN, it's like you're teaching the world, this goes back 25 years, you're teaching the world how to watch sports in sound bites, when you're doing Sports Center and stuff like that. So, of course, the next generation is going to just say, I don't need to watch 3 hours of a game from start to finish because they can see it on a recap. So,
well, and they don't need to watch Sports Center anymore now because exactly. They've got access to YouTube.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's to me, it makes it almost more exciting. I kid, and I'll end my part with this is that, I kid people that we would do we were a little past, this was the mid to late 70s, the martini lunch, and it's like, well, no wonder we had time for a 2-hour lunch. There was, as a national TV buyer, there was only 3 networks. It's like, and there wasn't a lot of reruns. It was like, okay, we've sold all that. What are we going to do now? Well, let's go to, Il Tonello and have some veal parmesan. It's like, but anyway.
The thing that I'm hearing, as it relates to being, as close to current as possible, is that the Il Tonello lunches are coming back, and that the digital folks have they've used up all their currency with data pitches and agency stuff, and everybody's starting to look a little bit the same. and now they're trying to differentiate themselves through the hospitality and the, bending the elbow kind of thing. So two things, right? The more things change, the more they stay the same. And I know that when I advertise, my sales go up, and when I stop advertising, my sales go down. Right? So, hey, Ed, any last comments you like? We've had a really great time hearing from you, man. You've just brought so much to the table here.
Well, in terms of words to the wise and suggestions to those who are coming in behind us, I would just reiterate some of the things I've mentioned and maybe reinforce. You've got to network. You've got to look for opportunities to meet people in the industry, volunteer for to do grunt work at events. It's amazing the people who you'll run into and get to know, and do your best to show them what you got and impress them with your attention to detail and your caring and interest in them. And all of that is the kind of fodder that leads to somebody standing out from the herd and getting an opportunity. And we all know that getting opportunities today, just sending your resume in and answering a questionnaire and letting AI sort it out, you're unlikely to get a great opportunity that way. You're much more likely to get a great opportunity by impressing the hell out of somebody with your knowledge of the industry, your attention to detail, your caring, your interest, your passion.
Yep.
So, that's what I would recommend. And I think one of the things that I've come into my understanding in recent years is how young people today are used to getting everything in small doses, and people don't particularly care to read. And I would suggest that if you want to go far in this industry, there is a huge amount of content available. You need to become an expert in the industry. But it doesn't mean you have to go to school to do it. You can teach yourself and read Sports Business Journal, read Sports Business Daily, read Sportico, and any one of dozens of other publications. And by the way, there are a ton of podcasts, and that's also worthwhile.
There's one.
Exactly.
Hey,
so
one last question.
So make
Okay,
yourself an expert. That's my recommendation.
And you can make yourself an expert in ways we couldn't really, other than showing up. So the last question,
none of these things existed back then. So
exactly.
We got lucky, and
we did.
You got to make your own luck.
That's right. So the last evergreen question that I didn't ask you yet is, what would be the advice that Ed Dessel would give to his 25-year-old self, or did you just give it?
I mean, I would say that in terms of my career, what I always did was I was inquisitive. I had a thirst for knowledge. I was willing to volunteer. I was willing to work hard. I had whatever intellect I had, and I tried to use it. I made mistakes along the way, and you always tend to learn things from your mistakes. So don't be afraid to try. And if you make an error, learn from it and correct. I would say if there's anything I would, rethink. I mean, I happened to get really lucky, and I got to ride a rocket ship, which was 23 years at the NBA at a time when the media business was growing, the sports media business was growing, the league business was growing, and I was at the right place at the right time, even if I wasn't the one who said yes to the job offer. So
that's great.
I wouldn't change any of that, but I would say I was also somewhat risk adverse, And I stayed at the NBA for a long period of time. And I suppose if I had to do it over again, there comes a point where you've done most of the things you can do at a place.
Right.
And I probably should have been thinking ahead more so than, what I did, which was, become a consultant. Maybe I should have worked at an entertainment company or at a network or at a tech company.
Right.
If I had to do over again, those would add to my repertoire.
Right.
But so be prepared to take risks. Hopefully they're intelligent risks, but you'll learn something regardless, and you'll expand your level of understanding, and you'll broaden your network. And those are all very,
Well,
very important things which I've benefited from.
that's great. That's great. Ed, thank you so much for your time today. I think it was just like a learning center, which is what we want to do. Yeah, the theme is sports, heavy sports, but it was just great to have you open up and talk about the great success you've had and the whys and wherefores, and we really do appreciate it. Thanks.